I don't know if I'll ever actually do anything with this, but I just thought, so our group of friends has been getting together to play D&D for many, many years at this point. We really started during some emotional times, and we've still stayed together, and it's been great. Even to the point that I've started recording everything that we have done and put it into a blog, which has been great. However, in this day and age, I've got some people reading it and it seems to be enjoyable. So, I don't know, I was just thinking, what else can I do to just get it out there? Because everyone loves hearing stories from the table, it seems like, and I feel like our group is hilarious. We don't live play, but mostly because we play online, and I don't think any of us really have the time to do that. Realistically, we all have jobs, we all have other lives, kids, lots of things, so it just never became like a live play thing, but I feel like we're kind of hilarious enough that we could be. Just saying. But I started recording it and, writing it down and putting it into a blog just to put it out there. And I have gotten people, have read it routinely and seemed like they enjoyed it. So I was just thinking, what else can I do to put this out there just because, just for fun. So I thought, well, what if I go through and kind of narrate or tell the story of our adventures through this and just see what happens, and maybe nothing will come of it. Maybe it'll drive a few people to check it out in the blog. Who knows? And by the way, the blog is called the full name is Adventitious, yeah, something like that, Adventurers. It's found on Blogspot or WordPress, sorry. I think the actual, address and stuff could be found below, and you can go check that out too. It has all of it. We're in our second campaign actually right now, but I was going to start and talk about our first campaign just because that's where we all started. I feel like it's been the best place so far, and just great, and see what happens. But to do that, I just had to shoot my shot, I guess. On that note, I think the first place to start from would be to, set up what it was, or where it is, what world we're in, essentially, because it was a homebrew adventure that our DM made up. And so it's not, the lands that you're used to. So I think going through that first would be great, to just set the scene of what's happening before we get into, who's in it involved and what they go and do. So I think today I'll just, keep it rather short, but set the scene of where that campaign took place. So like I said, it took place in a homebrew world known as Novae Terrae. It was a land that was split in two by two different not land masses, but it was like one big mass, and it was split into two different rulers, two different ideals, traditions, values. They were completely different, and it was split, multiple years before the start of our campaign. So the North was inhabited by strong, proud people who believed fully in the tradition of everything and community and strength for everyone. They were led by a king who valued his family and his people, but he didn't really value magic that much. It just didn't have a place in his world thinking. As a result, a lot of the people in the North tended to follow this belief. There were those that, who did wield magic, did have magic abilities, but they tended to not share their abilities broadly if they had them, for fear of, being looked down upon or anything else. And if they did have those abilities, it wasn't really honed because they didn't really have the magic schools. They didn't have the ability to fully become what they could be, or it was very uncommon. The environment in that area was, cooler and rougher. There were many mines, and where metals were found and mined to create weapons, because their army was substantially strong and large. Because of this, a lot of the, peoples in that area were mostly human, dwarf, and orc, of those, races. There were other races, however, it, wasn't always common to see them. And and on a whole, a lot of their living conditions were modest. There were some families who had great wealth and riches. However, generally, the population was fairly balanced. No one had super high riches outside of the king and his family. They just had slightly higher wealth than others, lived comfortably as opposed to modestly. And a lot of that was due to the king's idea that, there's a greater good for the mass, not for the few. On the flip side, the South was a land of innovation, creativity, independence. Magic was very valued highly here, and so there are lots of schools and universities and places that people could learn to wield this, magic. Their main governing body, instead of, a king, was actually relied on councils of different towns and cities to, run that area or that town or city. So overall, there was a lot more common to have everyone's beliefs be, what the councils were, or they, shared their beliefs wildly, instead of, being ruled by one person and whose own beliefs were the ones to be, imparted across everybody. It's also made their leadership very diverse, which was probably good, if we're gonna be honest. While all of also around this area, in the South, oh my God, okay. So unlike the North, there were, just like there were different, ruling ideals and beliefs and structure, the peoples of that area were very diverse as well. Most and any races could be found there. However, the most common were still about like human, elf, halfling. There were pockets of like even tieflings and lots of other things all throughout. They, were all welcome, all shared their ideals and their histories with everything. On a whole, those in the South enjoyed pleasant weather, unlike the North where it was cold. Their lives were so focused on keeping power, cut that out. In general, the people in the South enjoyed, pleasant weather. It was warmer, the temperature was more temperate and calm, as opposed to the North where it was more cooler and, not as temperate. It was, they had snow, they had whatever. The South had, more of this era of, relaxation and calmness. So they didn't value having a large army because they're like, well, people that come here, they don't really want to do anything to us because this is a great place to live. So because of this difference of leadership and value of independence, there is much more of a disparity between those who had money and those who didn't. There were people that were really, really rich and didn't share, and there were people that were very, very poor and lived, you know, still comfortably in some senses of the word, but not overall. However, generally, most of the people lived well, seemed to be happy. It was a great place to live compared to what they said about the North. Separating these two, you know, very different locations and ideals and value-based populations was a kind of no man's land strip of land called the Barrens. It wasn't truly barren. There were trees. It was like a forested area where it was very common and very easy to get lost and never be found again. And so no one really went into that area except to travel if they were, you know, like merchants or that kind of thing between the north and the south. There were also numerous monsters and threats that called this area their home. Therefore, it was very not a great place to go. It was differentiated or split off from the north and the south itself by two very, very large walls, one on the north side of the continent and one on the south. And these were continuously monitored and guarded for the safety of everyone involved, or everyone on the continent. And travel was not forbidden through this area. However, it was not advised at all, just because of all the things that we've said. Like, those who went in generally had a hard time coming back unless were merchants that traveled through that area all the time and were guarded and had lots of force with them. And let's see. So that's kind of the whole setup of the location of where our first campaign took place. Obviously there was lots of different, you know, locations, different thoughts, different values, different populations, which came into play. And we'll kind of start to see that as it goes. I think next time. So hope that you enjoyed this. I think if you want to stay tuned and come back next time, I'll kind of talk about our main core of adventures that started the campaign, because we all know not all of them finished the campaign. But I'll kind of go through who the starters were, and then kind of go from there and hopefully get into it and we can start the adventure. So hopefully, hope to see you next time.